Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got a couple African nightcrawler bins that I'm planning to feed today. It's been a week since I last got some food and from what I remember it wasn't a very plentiful feeding. I'm assuming they're going to need some food today. Besides that, I'm running out of space in my freezer. They were going to get food today whether they need it or not, I think. Might be the same way you manage your feedings too. Figured I'd point them out really quick here before we begin. I've got the younger of the two is down here. If I'm not mistaken, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 52, 54 days old, something like 7.5 weeks of age. And the older, more mature of the bins is this one here, 77 days of age, 11 weeks. Last time we checked in on them, things were a little bit damp, but we left the plastic coverings. We left all the coverings on them the way they were. And we knew things were too damp. We could tell just from looking at the material, and there was springtail activity in each of the bins too, which I'm not worried too much about. As far as I know, springtails don't cause problems. They help in the composting process. And since both bins still have a bit of time before they can get to the finish line, I think we've got time to deal with moisture later. So I figured I would just let things remain damp in these and let the worms enjoy it, at least for a while. I think it does help in the breakdown process. So let's get to feeding these guys. Get them up on the bench and we'll get to work. The stuff they're getting this week is typical feeding in my wormery is used coffee and a pretty substantial amount of various soup greens, all kinds of carrots and parsley and parsnip, maybe some celery in there too. It's kind of frozen into a big block, so I've tried to give it a moment or two to thaw out a little bit. We could always break this up a little bit as we're adding it to the worm bins. So I'm going to get the first one out here onto the bench and we'll get started with feeding them. Here in the VERMIBAG tote, I think the first thing we'll notice is a number of these little flying insects. And we did see them in here in the past, so you know, I was kind of hoping that maybe we would stop seeing them soon. But it does seem like they're kind of digging something about this container. Here too you can see a number of them. I don't know when they're long like this. I believe it's really just two of them connected to one another back to back, which must suggest to me at least that they're mating. So I think I just put a stop to that. Pardon the graphic footage there. Ugh. Alright, so we've got a little bit of mating activity going on here with these flying insects. I'm beginning to wonder if maybe the remedy to this would be to simply remove that cardboard and put it back on the shelf the way we found it here. That would allow for a little bit of light to enter through this translucent piece of plastic, maybe making the top surface of these pieces of paper right beneath it a little bit less of a attractive place for the worms to hang out on, but that's fine. I'm willing to forego the welcoming party in this bin when we first arrive. And it would seem that between the cardboard and the plastic, it does make for a seemingly comfortable spot for the for those little flying insects to be. So I'm beginning to think that step number one in our attempt at getting rid of these little flying insects might be to simply forget that cardboard covering. I think when we last left this bin, there might not have even been that cardboard covering yet. I think I might have added that during the week off camera. And maybe it was a mistake. Maybe we don't want to have that there, creating a nice little hiding spot for these little gnats or fruit flies or whatever to hang out in. So I think number one is no cardboard at the end. We're going to skip that and see if that helps a little bit. So I guess besides the flying insects, another anomalous creature in this container, one that you don't necessarily you know, plan to have in your bin, is the springtails. And I believe that the first thing I saw when I removed that piece of paper was a whole bunch of activity right there on the surface. I'm not sure if the camera caught it or not, but there's definitely a lot of springtail activity still happening in this container. And I think we kind of expected that in a way. because we didn't make any effort to try to reduce the moisture in here, and the moist environment is where you would normally expect to see a lot of springtail activity. The other thing I noticed right away when I opened this thing was the presence of a number of worm cocoons. So I mean, right here on the top I saw one. It's kind of encrusted in castings. I saw another one right next to it, slightly darker in color. And I saw a few more. There's another one here. Again, they're slightly encrusted in castings. And I think I saw a few more here and there. So that's always a good positive sign. I also like the way I'm seeing a lot of fresh castings getting deposited throughout the top surface. That looks really good as well. Let's take a little peek. Usually it's right when you start to pull back some of the top surface, and it's right under the top layer of material that you see the abundance of springtail activity. And I'm pretty sure the camera is probably going to capture it to a certain degree. I definitely see them cruising around. Every time I pull a little bit of material off to the side, everything just seems to shimmer and glitter almost. They're so tiny you can barely make them out, but just the presence of all of them and the fact that they're all moving makes it quite clear to see that they're there. Kind of also makes me wonder if it might be time to try to take steps to reduce their numbers somehow. Maybe trying to reduce the moisture in the bin a bit. I guess in both cases, with, you know, this bin being 11 weeks old, 77 days old at this point, and the other one only being 52 days old, it does seem to me like there's still a little bit of time, if we wanted to give the chance for this bin to dry off a little bit. So I like the way the castings sort of pile up on the top surface. I like the way the plastic bag being there promotes a lot of activity at the surface for the worms to do their work. Because otherwise things dry out a little bit and you just don't see as much activity on the top surface. So in a way you're reducing the composting activity in the bin by having spaces in the bin that are not quite as damp and attractive for the worms to hang out in. So I think there will be time to allow the bin to lose some of the excess moisture, and as a result hopefully wind up with fewer springtails in here. So maybe the plastic will just continue to remain in place for now at least. And then at some point in the near future we'll just start to try to let things dry off so as to see if we can minimize the number of springtails in here. Luckily, as far as I know, I don't think that they cause any harm to the worms. I believe they also assist in the breakdown of the material in the bin too, so there's no real big harm in having them there. It's just maybe, for me, a little bit unusual because I normally don't see them, really. So I'm just trying to find any sort of little scraps of old cardboard like this, and all these paper scraps that we saw down here. These pieces of shredded paper will eventually break down. They've been placed under the feedings as bedding to sort of capture any sort of moisture that might be emitted from the thawing food that gets added. So every time I add food, I always feel like I am also, along with it, including a fair bit of moisture. I'm not including any bedding on this go around, because I think we've got enough in here. Although, I'm looking over here at the piece of paper that we removed, because you'll remember I took off 2 pieces of paper under which there was one other larger piece of paper. I'm starting to wonder if this piece of paper might be better used as bedding down in the feeding area too. This way we're not adding any material to the bin from a bedding perspective per se. We're just kind of reusing something that was already in there. So yeah, why don't we do this? We're just gonna piece up this piece of paper because we'll still be left with that other 2 strips of paper, those 2 sections of paper with which we can cover things up with right below the plastic, and then this stuff can also go in as bedding at this point. You keep hearing over and over in these worming videos, no matter what channel you go to, most people seem to concur that you can never really go wrong with having an abundant amount of bedding. And I'll admit, I always feel like I'm a little bit skimpy and stingy when it comes to bedding, so I always try to see if there's an opportunity for me to try to turn that around a little bit and improve on the amount of bedding that I include in my my worm bins. I'm bringing over the first portion of frozen material here, which, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of frozen together, but luckily it's all very small particles and all fairly easy to bust apart from each other. I would think that the worms are going to appreciate this. This stuff looks really yummy. I'm wondering if I could even bring up some of this bedding that we just added to sort of commingle it a little bit in with the newly added food. There's all those other strips of paper down near the bottom too. I just don't want to have too much, if any, of the food sticking out the top if possible, so I'm hoping to leave enough material out here on the sides with which we can cover up in the end. Although I don't think any of this stuff is really going to be the type of stuff that attracts a lot of insects. So hopefully even if some of it does sort of stick out the top, which I don't think it will at this point, hopefully it doesn't. If it were sweet aromatic fruits, you know, with the sweet smell, all the sugars starting to ferment as the material breaks down, start to become really aromatic, then that might have a tendency to attract perhaps a little bit more insect activity into the bin, which is something we don't need. But I don't think with any of this sort of stuff it's a matter of concern. And I've got a little bit of coffee in here, not too much, so I'm going to save a little bit for the other bin that we're feeding. Try to make it a fair portion. And then we can start moving some material back in from the sides to cover up our feeding area. This is usually like the best time, I guess, to see how things look on the outskirts of the bin. It is kind of nice to look on the outer edges and find a good bit of moisture and a good number of worms enjoying the space. Here's some old food. This banana peel stem, it looks like it's been in here for some time. And it breaks down nicely. You can even see a worm occupying it. So I guess the one thing that we have been doing, which we're hoping might help a little bit, is just fluffing the material around a little bit to give it a little bit more airflow, since it is a bit damp. And at some point in the near future, I believe I should probably start thinking about giving this container an opportunity to air out a bit and dry off a little bit. But for now, I'm not going to sweat it too much. I know it's going to be damp when we come back in here the next time. I know we're still going to see a good number of springtails. But I believe it is the damp environment that's needed to give this sort of material, all these sticks and stems of the leaves that I had used originally to build the bin, to give that stuff a chance to break down too. Because if it's very dry, this stuff is just going to remain brittle and hard, and the worms will be unable to approach any of that or break it down. So by keeping things nice and damp in here, it can only help promote good breakdown of everything in the bin, in all areas of the bin. And yeah, I'm referring to it as a bin, but it's obviously a bag. You can see this is a VERMIBAG tote. And down here too, some remainder of the previous feedings. So that's the thing is, you know, when I put the new food in the middle and I push things off to the side, out here on the outer edges is where you're going to find like that old, you know, banana peel stem or whatever that piece of green leafy material was out here. All the old feedings seem to make their way out to the outer edges, and the worms definitely seem to dig that, because that material has had a good opportunity to break down, making it a lot easier for the worms to make good use of it as food. So yeah, I think things look really nice. Let's start covering things back up here. Keep reminding myself that we're not going to be putting the cardboard covering back on. We're just going to take these two smaller sheets of paper that were on here earlier, and place them back on the way we found them. If memory serves me correctly, we were attempting to keep these more colorful images on top. You can see already how the colors are fading for sure. And then we'll finish off with just a plastic covering. It would be nice if nothing else, it would be nice at least to see a reduction of the flying insects in this bin. And then at a later point in time, we could try to deal with the moisture, try to get the moisture to drop down a little bit, and see if maybe at a future point we can work on reducing the number of springtails in here. All right, so let's get the other newer of the two bins out here. Like I said, this is 77 days old. The one we're going to feed next is 52 days old. Number of feedings, this is going to be feeding number 11 for this one. And for the one that we're getting to next, that's going to be feeding number 7. All right, let's get that one out here. All right, so now, in this bin, I don't even know why it is this way. But basically, it does seem like this piece of cardboard on top might be removed from here as well, because it seems to be doing sort of a double duty, because in this case, I've sort of tried something a little different. I integrated a piece of plastic covering, which would normally go under the cardboard, but in this case, the cardboard was actually slipped right inside the plastic bag to sort of make them into a combination sort of setup. So usually the cardboard is meant to minimize the amount of light that makes its way into the bin, so that the surface right below the plastic can be a comfortable place where the worms like being, because it's dark. So I think just by replacing that plastic bag covered piece of cardboard, I think we'll be just fine, and we can leave off that top piece of cardboard, which was on there for I don't know why. Guess I wasn't really paying too much attention. Definitely seeing springtails here too right away. First thing I could see is springtails hanging out right there in the middle, front and center. Naturally, they're going to be in the bedding as well when we look under the paper. Yeah, look at them all. Definitely a lot of springtails in this container. First thing you see is just a lot of movement right at the top, and then it suddenly vanishes. They all just sort of almost immediately submerge down into the material. So I think we've got a similar situation going here, where maybe at some point in the near future we can look for an opportunity to try to reduce moisture in here to see if we can reduce the number of springtails hanging out in here. But these two bins are extremely similar to one another, even though there's, I don't know how many days, almost a month different in their ages. The bins do seem to have a fairly consistent appearance to them. And even though this one's a little bit younger, it also looks fairly far along. Lots of castings all over the place. I think it's because of the high moisture content that's allowed to exist throughout the bin. Maybe we'll take a peek here on the outskirts just to see if we can see how things look. Very, very damp. A lot more damp than the other bin was. Kind of makes me wonder if we were to not have that cardboard, and we won't. We're going to leave that one off, the second piece of cardboard that was on top. Just wondering if just by not having that there will allow for just a little tiny bit more airflow around the outer edges to maybe allow a little bit of this moisture to escape from this bin. I think it would do this bin a lot of good, because it doesn't need to be this damp. The dampness definitely helps, give the worms a nice cozy space to be in, to do their work, but you also don't want to go to the extreme. I'm already seeing signs of the last feeding down in here. A little unusual. Maybe we just don't have as many worms in this container. But I would assume, I can't remember exactly now, but I would assume that we probably fed in a very similar fashion in both of these containers last time we visited in here. Oh, I always seem to do that with these mango seeds. They're kind of springy, and every time I try to peek inside one of them and it slips out of my hand, I end up catapulting all kinds of material across my wormery. Definitely some scraps down here, but maybe really what I'm just seeing down here is leftover, paper. I mean, yeah, there's signs of the previous feeding. Right here is some of it. And like a mango seed, you don't want to expect this to vanish very quickly. This is definitely going to take time to get consumed. But I believe that the majority of what we're observing down here in the feeding area is just some of the bedding that was used to go in underneath the food that was last added. So even though there's a little bit of scraps from the last feeding remaining, I could tell some of it is right here in my hands. There doesn't seem to be too much, not too much at all. But yeah, you can almost see like little puddles, little bits of standing water at the bottom, which is not exactly the optimal situation. You know, usually if you grab a handful of material out of your bin and give it a good tight squeeze, you know, there's worms in here, so I'm not going to do it. But you could probably imagine that if I do, I'm not even going to squeeze that hard, but you're probably going to see some moisture. Yeah, there it goes. Coming out of what's in your hand, and it really shouldn't be any more than a drop or two. So the fact that I was able to pretty easily squeeze out that much moisture is to me an indication that this bin is definitely getting a little bit too damp. And I usually take sort of baby steps when I try to remedy things, you know, try to steer things in the right direction, but not drastically, so that I can observe the progress of the changes that I made. So I believe that maybe at this point we'll just leave that cardboard covering off the second cardboard covering off the top. And then maybe it'll just allow for that little tiny extra bit of airflow around the edges of the plastic to permit things to dry off here a little bit. So that's kind of what I'm going to be hoping for. Definitely more damp than we need it to be. I guess that since this is the younger bin, and like I said earlier, you can't really go wrong with too much bedding, maybe it would make sense to put a little bit of fresh, dry bedding down into the feeding area to sort of complement the existing bedding that's here already. So, I mean, there was a fair bit of it that we pulled out right here in my hands that we're going to put right back down in there before we add the food. But I'm wondering if we were to add a little bit of dry bedding in there as well, maybe that'll assist in soaking up a little bit of the moisture too. And usually in my older bins, I try not to put a lot of leaves in because I don't want to be left with you know, a bin full of finished compost that's littered with a bunch of stems of leaves like this. But in a bin like this, that's still only about a month and a half old, I know that it's still got a good couple months to go. So in these newer bins of mine, I don't mind using leafy matter as bedding. So I'm going to grab some leafy matter to put in here as the first layer of our bedding to put in. And then we'll start putting this old bedding back in as well as the new food we brought down. What I have in my box here is not much, so I'm just going to go ahead and use it all. As you can see, it has the leaves, the stems of the leaves in here. And it's a good amount of bedding and it's all dry. So I got a feeling it's going to help a lot with absorbing some of the moisture that's in here. Or at least I hope so. But after a while, I'll usually try to withhold from using this type of bedding. And then I'll try to stick to stuff like paper and things like that, which I believe have the ability to break down a little bit more quickly than that really hard type stuff that comes in with the leaves. I mean, if there was a way for me to just get the leafy matter and not the stems of the leaves, then I would, I'd be happy to use that type of bedding going right up to very close to the end of the bin's life cycle. But knowing that my leafy material always includes these little sticks and stems, more recently I've been trying to withhold using it from my older bins so that I don't end up with, material like this that needs extra time at the end to break down when it seems like the rest of the bin is already ready for harvesting. I'm running out of space in here. Just by putting in all that leafy material, it feels like we've come pretty close to the top here. Oh my goodness. The food seems like quite a bit too. I think that's the theme today, good hearty feeding, and it's kind of like my my last feeding the other day, a couple days ago, where I felt like I had put in a lot of food, maybe a little bit more than usual. So it does seem like my my 7-day interval between the feedings in most of my bins at this point can probably be extended a little bit to give these little guys a chance to get caught up with everything they've been given. Not to mention the fact that I got coffee too that I want to give them, so definitely a very abundant feeding for this container. Now my only concern is being able to cover it all effectively. Luckily this ain't the sort of stuff, like I said earlier, that I'm worried about so much that it's gonna draw insects. Hopefully I'm not mistaken. So we'll just see if we can use some of the material from the outer edges to get this stuff covered up a little bit. Maybe if I even spread it around a little outwards, we can get its height down, its depth reduced, so that we can end up with an entire bin that's fully covered everywhere. Yeah, that might work. Let's try that. Let's bring some of this over, make some space on the edge, and we'll see if we can nudge some of it outboard. Lots and lots of food on this go around. All stuff that's going to bring with it extra moisture for the bin. So hopefully all those dry leaves that we just added help a lot too in absorbing some of the moisture. Good plentiful feedings this week. I guess it makes sense, right? We just had Thanksgiving. Let's let the worms enjoy it a little bit too. Kind of a belated Thanksgiving celebration for the Wormery, right? All right, a little bit muddy, as I think we already knew. It's usually on my gloves that I could tell that I've got perhaps a little bit more moisture going on than I want, when the stuff starts to really stick to the gloves a little bit more than I would like. So as we start returning the materials to the bin, we're gonna return this paper covering. I believe that's a oh, there's another one, 2, 3. Okay, there's cocoons all over this thing. There's another one. Oh, here's 2 more. That's the thing, is if you slow down for a moment or two, you actually start seeing lots of them. In the past, I always just kind of rattled right by and didn't take note. But when you just slow down for a moment, you can all of a sudden start seeing worm cocoons all over the place. And then on goes this plastic covered piece of cardboard, which really does go right out to the edges. And as much as I would like to see a little bit more ventilation in this bin to maybe allow it to shed some of its moisture, maybe we'll just live with it for maybe another week or so, till the next time we come in here to feed, just to allow it to remain nice and damp. Let the worms enjoy it, let them break down everything in the bin. And then at some point in the future, we'll tend to, you know, dealing with the moisture, trying to help it reduce a little bit. So I'll take care of cleaning things up and putting everything away over here, but I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.